Welcome to the MuseCast, where we squeeze every last drop of inspiration out of Sunday's sermon.
Well, good afternoon and welcome to the MuseCast, where we get to continue the conversation from our Sunday sermons. My name is Shawna and we know right now we're not really supposed to be traveling really yet still. So if you were able to wake up tomorrow morning and pack a bag and go anywhere that you wanted to go, money's no object, where would you go? I'm going to be very basic and simple and say I go to Duluth because I know. I love the North Shore. I think it's beautiful. So that's where I would go.
Wow.
We also have Dan Kent with us. Dan, hi.
Hello.
Where would you go?
That's a good question. Duluth, that surprised me. I was thinking like, Mazatlan or something like that, Bora Bora, but Duluth. But, Duluth is the San Francisco of Minnesota, so it really is. So I love going up there too. I think I would want to go to Peru, and I can't tell if it's because Peru is so awesome or because I was like young and healthy and full of energy when I went there last time, and it was a good time in my life.
Yeah.
And but it's sort of got this Indiana Jones vibe. You go to these Mayan ruins and stuff, and it's very fun. It's very exciting. So that's where I would go. Osheta, how about you? Where would you go?
So I was just in Duluth.
Yes, you are.
I know. And so if I wasn't just in Duluth, I would say to the North Shore. But I miss the East Coast. So I would probably take a plane to Boston, spend some time there, then go to our favorite family camp, Covenant Pines, which is in Keene, New Hampshire, and stay there for a week, and then kind of just do all the fun East Coast little small town things. Make some jam, get some honey, do all the things East Coast.
You can see I'm just thinking day road trip.
That's right. Yes, that's
Get
right.
in the plane and go.
Go. Well, again, we're so thankful that you're here, and like we've said before, we believe that because you tune in and because you're watching the sermons, that you are right there on board with us, what we're discussing and what we've been diving into. And so we just want to say thank you. We know that you've been hearing some stuff that's really hard to hear, and it could sound as if we're coming against, let's just say, white people, but that's not the case. I just want to say, I know you guys out there love Jesus, and you love the kingdom, and you love all, and you are fighting alongside us for inclusion, and you're fighting alongside us for equality, and we see that, and we are thankful for that. Thank you for your work. Thank you for educating yourselves. I know sometimes you can feel like I might say the wrong thing, but just thank you. You have space here, and we appreciate you so very much. So again, thank you. This past weekend, we got to hear from Ephraim, which was a real treat.
Yes.
I really enjoyed that. Dan, will you go ahead and summarize for the MuseCast audience what Ephraim had to say?
Yeah, Ephraim talked about, well, first of all, let me just say, I haven't seen Ephraim speak in probably at least 8 years.
Yeah.
And I forgot his spirit is so jolly.
He is.
And
He's
can you imagine? I can't imagine very few people other than Ephraim that I'd rather have read me a children's story.
Yeah.
Because even when this content can be very serious, you still see a joy there in his affect and how he presents, and that's very welcoming because some of this stuff gets really heavy, and he just models how even the heaviest content does not take away the joy of the Lord, and so that by itself, I thought was fun to watch and be a part of. But in terms of his content, he talked about, he looked at the Old Testament, he looked at, in particular, Exodus, how the Israelites were kind of held under the oppressor, under Egypt, and they were oppressed, and they were liberated from that oppression. And he talked about a few interesting insights about that. One is that the Bible talks frequently, and that was the example that he really kind of camped out on, about how people can live in a community, and their community can be oppressed by another community, and that oppression isn't because of, you can't point to a single individual on the side of the oppressor and say they're to blame. It really is this system, and that system, you can see it going all the way back to Exodus, benefited some people and was disadvantageous to others. And it benefited the Egyptians, and it was disadvantageous to the Hebrews. And then Ephraim kind of looks through the Old Testament, looks at other examples of people groups who found themselves in a system that put them at a disadvantage, and they couldn't flourish and thrive the way that God wants them to flourish and thrive. And then he raised a second point, and he looked at religious people who were also part of a system that oppressed others. And that was very enlightening because, we even see this in the Bible that people who have faith in God, have genuine faith in God, really believe in God, and are really seeking God, can still contribute to systems that are very ungodly. And kind of what you were saying, Shawna, like people who are watching the MuseCast and people who are part of this community, we are striving to seek God. We are genuine in our striving to seek God, but that doesn't mean that we're also not also contributing to something that's very ungodly. And part of the benefit of kind of this type of time that we're living in is we get to see some of the systems that we might be contributing to that we might not have been aware of, and so that's very advantageous for us. And then finally, he kind of talks about some applications. He talks about how in order for a people to be liberated, a lot of times it takes individuals to be liberated, and so he talks about letting God liberate the story of who you are. So just getting to understand the story, your personal story, and how God is liberating you, and how that might then compel you to help other people be liberated. And he talked about liberating your soul, so finding the areas inside of your soul that are not very godly, and allowing God to help you in liberating those ungodly parts of your soul. And then finally, liberating your voice, to empower you and to give you the courage to speak up against whatever forces might be oppressing our brothers and sisters. And that's scary, and I think Moses was a great place to start because he was not good at speaking up, and so he was a good place to start. And yet God used him, and so that's sort of my summary of Ephraim's message. Osheta, what did you think of his message?
I think it was a good summary. But one of the things that stood out to me, and I'm still processing this, so I'm like you guys know, I did this thing where I throw spaghetti against the wall, and I'm like, what's sticking with this? But what stood out to me was he said, so he was like, well, what about Christian people, or Christian, the religious people? And the very next thing he said was, they asked for a king. Yeah. And that just really stuck in me, because I think that when we reject God, and we reject as God as our king, and we reject the kingdom way, we want to build systems that affirm us, right? And we want to have leaders that we get to handpick that we feel like is the very best of us. And I think that, so it was just so interesting that he was like, well, the way that the corruption kind of entered in, or that, how systems that don't work for others and work for some within Christians or within the Jews, was they asked for a king. They asked for somebody else to be their leader, and they asked to be able to have a leader that they, like I said, they can form in faction, and they can influence to set the systems to care for others and oppress some. And so that that has just really been spinning in my mind, because even as a Black person, when I think about my own kind of bent towards what makes me feel comfortable or what I want, sometimes I don't want to follow the kingdom way. Sometimes I don't want to practice loving my white brothers and sisters, but I know that that's the kingdom way. I kind of want to fashion my own kind of response. And so I just felt like that was such a profound kind of thing that, and he didn't even spend a whole lot of time. It's just a throwaway sentence, but sometimes it's always what happens in a sermon. There's one sentence that you're I can't get away from.
Yeah, he talked about how they had been liberated, they had been delivered, they had been set free, and after all of that, they couldn't just rest in that liberation. Yeah. They sought for something else. Yeah. To lead them. Yeah. So that was so fascinating. Yeah. I really appreciated too, and I kind of almost predicted this would happen. After Ephraim spoke, and like you said, Dan, he's so jovial and he's so excited about Scripture, and holy buckets, to get excited about Exodus like that. Right. It's just okay. It was really, and so you knew Greg was going to be fired up. So then when he got up, he almost went to preach another little sermon, but he held it together, but he did talk about some things that I thought were interesting. He mentioned race fatigue, and so I would love to tap into that a little bit. What stood out to you guys when Greg got up and started talking about race fatigue, especially during that Reconstruction period in our history?
Yeah. Well, two questions there. The Reconstruction piece, I'm still learning about that, and the fact that, like, I think it was 1900, this wasn't the Reconstruction, this was well after, but 1900 to 1905, like 85% of Georgia's income was off of prisoners, off of black prisoners. Like 85% of their domestic product was free labor, and you know, stuff like that. That's just like those types of facts kind of encourage me to keep learning and to keep examining and keep exploring. But at the same time, I do also have fatigue about this because I'm the type of guy who let's find something to celebrate. You know, let's
Right.
let's get on to the party now. You know,
You're looking for hope.
That's right.
Yeah.
I want hope, and
Yes.
and the other part of that too is, and I think I was one of the people who was talking to Greg about how I can't wait until we're through this season. Partly because I feel like there's a diminishing return. Like I feel like talking and exploring, there's a diminishing return to that. At some point, there needs to be changes, and I only have this much power and say so in our society. And right now, we're kind of depending on the people who have this much power and say so in society. And so I feel like the people down here have done a tremendous amount of work with the protests and with the organization, and now you know, we're kind of dependent on what the people above us do, and so it's not that I'm fatigued. I just feel like I've spent what I can do, but maybe I haven't. Maybe there's just things that I don't know that I could be doing. I don't know. I'm open to whatever.
Yeah, and I think that's the key, is being open. Like when you feel like you've reached the end of your journey, or all you have to, like, be open to what else God may show you. Osheta, what are your thoughts on race fatigue? Is it something we need to fight through? Do we just say, all right, take a break?
I mean, I think taking a break is important, but I think that one of the things that I really appreciated in Greg's mini sermon was he kept emphasizing how long things took.
Yeah.
And so I think for me, I totally have so much compassion on white people who have never thought about this, and now they're hearing it from everywhere. And so yeah, that can be totally, like, fatiguing. Is that a word? Like, it can really make you feel overwhelmed. I just feel like this is a reality that we have to pay attention to. This is a system that we have to dismantle, and we have to do it piece by piece, brick by brick. And that means you cannot, like Greg said, grow weary in doing good.
Right.
And so I think that one of the wisest things that white people can do is to kind of look at, where am I getting all my information from? Maybe I need to limit some of that. Maybe I need to have spaces where I can talk about it that are affirming and hopeful. But I think, like, the concept of rest for white people makes me really, really nervous, only because I'm afraid that rest means like no longer care.
Yeah, opting out.
Opting out. Like, and I know this, like, if I'm working out and I have, like, my day off, like, I have to have people that remind me, or that, like, the next thing is, like, I do it with somebody else, like, I go, because I will be like, that day off was so good. Like, I don't think I want to do it again. And then I just don't do it. And so I just think that there is a bit of self-discipline along with this, like, rest notion. But yes, I completely affirm that there is fatigue. We are in the middle of a battle. And so,
absolutely. And the thing is if you look at historically, like, we're talking about something that's been in place for hundreds and hundreds of years. So really, it's been about a little over a month since everything's kind of bubbled to the forefront. I don't think we're quite done, but I totally get it. Like, it can be overwhelming, absolutely. And so there is absolute grace for that. But I don't think we get to opt out at any point.
Exactly.
No matter where we are, we can't opt out.
And I think that we need to be able to hold, like, statements like Dan.
Yes.
Like I think we need to be able to say like, yeah, like you're right. There is a diminishing return in that if we hear the same thing all the time from the same place, it kind of becomes background noise.
Yeah.
So I think that's what I'm hearing when I hear you say that.
Right.
I don't hear you say like I don't want to talk about this anymore.
Absolutely not.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think that there's even something wise about that. Again, where are you listening? Are you hearing the same thing over and over again?
Yeah.
Maybe you need to like quiet that voice for a little bit and pick up a new voice.
Yeah. But it's so true what you said too, Dan, is that we can only do so much with our voice. And it does seem like those who hold more power, it's really like, okay, now it's up to you, like to really bring about change. But I just feel like our voice is always important. So be encouraged. Your voice is always important,
Yeah.
even if your voice is tired.
Yes.
It's still needed. So, okay, so I want to go back to Ephraim's part of the sermon because he said some things that were really intriguing to me about sin. And I was talking earlier today with my husband, and I cannot remember in all my years really being a part of a sermon series where we talk about the sin of racism, like so emphatically and in such an intentional way. And I really appreciate that. But Ephraim talked about how when you're dealing with sin, you have it on a personal level, like we all have our individual sins, but there is also a sin that occurs on the systemic level.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if you two, brilliant scholars that you are, can unpack that a little bit for our MuseCast audience. Who wants to go first?
I'll start.
Okay.
Greg and I, we do a podcast together, and we just had this question on what is the difference between sin and evil, and so when you say racism is a systematic sin, his answer to this question really was enlightening to me, because what he said is that when we sin, we miss the mark.
Yep.
We're aiming for godliness, but we're off. Evil is when we're not even aiming at godliness.
No.
When we're going a totally different, we
Yeah.
don't care one bit about what God says.
No.
We're just going whatever we want. And so the fact that racism has been labeled as a systemic sin means that people who are saying, well, I'm godly, I'm a Jesus lover, exactly. That's because we all agree that we're all aiming for godliness, but you can look at society and see that we're missing the mark. And so to say that it's systemic sin isn't to say that it's that you're not godly, that you're not genuine in your pursuit of Jesus or anything like that. In fact, the fact that you're genuine in your pursuit of Jesus is the reason why we call it systemic sin, not evil.
Yeah.
Although sometimes it can be evil as well, but we're not going after that. What we're looking at is people who are really seeking God, who might be contributing to something that is causing us as a whole to miss the mark. And so that I was bringing that with me when I saw Ephraim speak, and that was enlightening to me. I don't know what to do with that, but other than, because a lot of people get defensive when you talk about systemic racism.
They do.
And for me, that way of thinking of it kind of diffuses some of my own defensiveness, because it's not that my faith is being called into question, my practices, and my genuine love for God is not being called into question. My blind spots are, and so that was helpful for me.
Yeah. I like the way you just said that. Your blind spots is what's being called into question. And I think we all have those. And would we not want to have those revealed so that we can become more Christ-like, so we can truly be the image bearers that we're called to be? Osheta, what are your thoughts about personal sin versus systemic sin?
Well,
or not really versus, but
Yeah, I knew okay, so again, Dan, you've just said something that has made me really ask this question. So when we talk about systemic racism, is that really a sin or is that an evil? Because I don't know that the slave traders were trying to achieve holiness or godliness, in capturing and enslaving Black people.
That's hard to envision.
Yeah, and so I guess for me, the way I think about it, or the way that I'm kind of metabolizing it is, okay, so racism is evil. Racism is a complete dehumanization of image bearers. But there's sinful, but in our interpersonal relationships, we can miss the mark. And so as I'm interacting with white people who are trying to figure it out, or as I'm working on my own bias and prejudice, and there's a missing of the mark that's going on in here. But I think I'm feeling a little uncomfortable with saying that racism is a sin
Right.
overall, you know?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you this. So imagine this. You have a police officer who's trying to uphold peace, and he's trying to, protect the law and to hold the law, and he's basically a defender of the law, and he is therefore he's patrolling the streets, and he's doing the best that he can to do that. He's not evil. He might have a racial bias, and he might, because of his racial bias, contribute to the incarceration problem that we have between blacks and whites. The incarceration problem, I think, is based on an evil that says that some people are less worthy than others because of the color of their skin. And there are people who not only contribute to that, but they actually believe that, and they are stakeholders in that. Now, the police officer isn't evil, I wouldn't say, but he is contributing to sin. Would you agree with that? Am I off there? Because when I said the difference between sin and evil, something didn't feel right. But I think there's also something right about it.
No,
we just haven't fully fleshed it out, I don't think yet.
And I think that I think there's more teasing that can happen, and that may even need to be its own sermon, kind of like different, because I think that thinking about a system as evil allows me to do that Ephesians 6:12 thing and be like principalities and powers. When I think about people, human beings who are influenced by this evil system, who then make sinful choices, that allows me to practice like love of the other, xenophilia. And so I think I'm saying yes, but I'm still like teasing it out.
So you're saying that the system is evil, the people who are affected by its sin.
Yes.
I think that's a good way to distinguish it.
Well, and if you think about it, we each have blind spots. We each have moments when we're missing the mark, or situations where we're missing the mark, when we are not being fully image bearers of God. And if those blind spots or those missing the mark, if those have to do with race, think about people individually carrying that into their workplace, like you were saying with the police officer, or the judicial system, or the CEO of a bank, or whatever, a teacher or whatever. Like that sin can begin to infiltrate the system because you have a place in the system. So I think it's maybe a both and
it kind of will work its way up to when actual changes are being made, because enough people within the system hold this sinful posture, right? Which is encouraging, because if enough people change to have a kingdom vision, like a vision of unity and restoration, if enough people enter in that system, then the system can potentially change.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, that's why I feel like we can't opt out. No matter how little our voice is, we can't opt out, because if enough of us come together with that kingdom purpose, then it has to make a difference. It can influence the system that we're trying to infiltrate.
Right.
And a good example of that is the governor of South Carolina, who said that lynching was the white prerogative that was divinely handed down to white people to punish blacks without a trial. And that guy was voted in twice. And so there were enough people who were like, yeah, that sounds right, to vote this guy in twice. And so that's where individual sin can cause systematic evil, maybe.
And that might even be, for those white people who are feeling fatigued by this race conversation, that might even be then the thing that they could be doing that doesn't look like, oh, I'm reading this book now, I'm listening to this thing, I'm protesting, like that, like inner work, that inner heart work, that healing of your own kind of, that liberation of your own story. I think that is maybe an answer to, okay, I'm tired of taking in information. What do I need to process, think about in front of God?
That's good.
Yeah, and I think that was a challenge to us all, regardless of where we are on the race spectrum. Right? Like, let God liberate your story.
That was
we all have a story that needs to be liberated.
That's really good.
Let God liberate your soul, and let God liberate your voice. That was so good. In regards to liberating our story, our soul, and our voice, Osheta, what sparked within you when you hear that?
So I had never heard him talk about the staff and the snake that way, or the hand and the cloak and pulling it. I never heard about it as like a glimpse of what is harmful and what what's harmful and a glimpse of what's whole.
Yeah.
I never even, like, that was mind-blowing to me. And I think when he said, like, it's not a snake that's nipping at your heels anymore, it's something that you can use to lead. And I was like, oh my gosh.
Wow.
Like, is that your message, like,
Right.
you hear that?
Right.
But that for me was so important, because I feel like a huge part of, like, me wanting to be a part of anti-racist conversations is because I have, like, done some work in working through my story and allowing God to heal, and I want that for others. Like, it's not that I want people to, like, change their minds just because I want to be right and say, haha, like, you were wrong and I led you the right way, but it's like there's healing and restoration on the other end of this. And so I think when he said that, like, that picture of a snake just, like, at your heels was like, like, he is so good at, like, for me, it was like dropping these, like, little things.
Yeah.
And then the, like, liberating of your voice, I think that really, like, resonated, because I'm, like, in the middle of this book writing project, and I'm, like, super struggling with, like, what do I have to say? And I feel like I'm hearing that across the board, every who's like, what do I say right now? What do I do? I'm going to say the wrong thing. I don't have enough. And just knowing that, like, Moses even said that to God's self, and God was like, listen. Like,
even after God had proven himself to this man, like, very real, like,
yeah,
it was like,
I don't have the words. God's like, are you serious? So I think it was really encouraging to me.
Yeah, amen. Dan, what sparked in you? I know you shared some of that in your summary at the beginning of the show, but.
Yeah, well, I think one thing that I like about kind of liberating your own story, even if it's in the context of some of the racial stuff that we're kind of exploring right now as a community, kind of making sure that you understand your own story in that is important, because I think what can happen is people can, if they lose sense of themselves, they will just identify with the movement or whatever.
Yeah.
And then suddenly when it's time to move on to celebration or the next phase of our society, of our community, there won't be a self there, because and so there's like this incentive to I guess I'm not saying it very well. Let me say it this way. One of the things that you see in mental health is called secondary gains, and it's one of the things that counselors will work really hard at, is to help people deconstruct their secondary gains. And so, for instance, a person might be depressed all the time, and they might be coming to the hospital because of their depression, and part of that might be because their depression has kept them safe from somebody who is flirting with them, like maybe a family member who is making sexual advances. The depression and the dour affect has kept them safe from that person. Same thing with overeating has kept them safe. And so when you look at depression and overeating, you can't just look at those things. You have to look at what is this person getting out of it. And I think with any type of popular movement in society, you can get secondary gains, kind of like what you were saying, Osheta. I don't want to tell my story just so that I can be the hero who leads people to the truth.
Yeah.
I'm telling my story for my own reasons. This isn't about ego. This is the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And that's why liberating your story can keep ego from getting involved,
that's real
and
good.
keep secondary gains from getting involved, and keep yourself aligned with truth seeking and so forth. And so that's what I really appreciated about that. That's a very convoluted way of saying that, but hopefully it made sense.
Well, and the thing is, I think the key was he was saying, let God do this work. Like, let God do the liberating, because we can only do so much in our own strength and in our own vein. But when we allow God to meet us in that place, no matter how deep or dark or ugly it is, or frustrating it is, he can bring that liberation to every part of our lives. And I think that's so powerful. And again, tying back to last week, our liberation is tied to one another.
That's right.
Right?
Yep.
Like, you get liberated, and that's tied to my liberation, which is tied to your liberation. Like, we are supposed to be in this knit together. And I thought that was really beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things I love about our community is that we're not just talking about this on Sundays and then diving deeper on Tuesdays. Our youth ministry have been talking about these things every week, and one of the cool things that they do is when they are able to go off on retreats, they spend time at the end of the retreat asking the students to do a personal reflection of the things that they've heard and learned. And so we know they haven't been able to go away on a retreat, but they have been having these discussions along with us these last several weeks. And so last week they asked students to bring about a personal reflection just something that they felt like sparked within them, or something that stood out to them, or a response is really what it is. It's a personal response. And so one of the Echo students wrote something up, and so I thought it would be great to close by sharing that.
That sounds great.
Again, our time always flies when we're having all the fun, so thank you for being with us. But I just want to close with this response from one of our Echo students in regards to everything that we've been talking about. It says, "Let us continue to push. Push for peace, push for love, push for positivity, and push for justice. For the root of this is hatred, and we are here to oppose it. We are here to instead spread the word of God. We are here to spread love. We will continue to push. We must make our voices heard. We must be vocal of this. We must be as vocal of this as we are of our love for God, and we must continue to love."
Amen.
So, amen to the young people who are getting it and who are letting their voices be heard. And just as an encouragement from us to you, let God liberate your story. Let him liberate your soul. Let him liberate your voice. Do not grow weary in well-doing. We are in this together. We thank you so much. We are so appreciative of you joining us every week, and we will see you next week. Bye, guys.
Friends.